Did you know that in the Middle Ages, a beaver was considered a fish? And that sugar was so rare it was sold as a spice, locked away with pepper and saffron. We think of medieval food as a dreary affair. Gray, gruel, tough bread, and greasy meat on a bone. We imagine peasants starving and kings feasting on swans. Some of that is true, but what if their rules, born from necessity and a completely different understanding of health, were actually better for us than our modern food guidelines? What if the things they did without thinking are the very things we're now spending a fortune to get back? They didn't have nutrition labels or diet fads. They had seasons, scarcity, and a set of beliefs about how food affected the body. And strangely, science is starting to prove them right on a lot of things. Let's look at the old rules. The forgotten wisdom. The accidental health plan of our ancestors. Number 22. Why was their bread better than ours? Think about bread today. It's soft. It's white. It's uniform. It can sit on a shelf for 2 weeks without changing. That's not bread. That's a bread-like product. Medieval bread was the opposite. It was heavy, dark, and dense. For most people, it wasn't made from finely sifted white wheat flour. That was for the rich. Common bread was made from rye, barley, oats, or a mix of grains called maslin. And it was made with a sourdough starter. They didn't have commercial yeast packets from the store. They captured wild yeast from the air and cultivated them in a starter, a living, bubbling mix of flour and water. This is a process of slow fermentation. The yeast and bacteria in the starter predigest the flour. They break down compounds like phytic acid. Phytic acid is an anti-nutrient found in grains that can block the absorption of minerals like iron, zinc, and calcium. The long fermentation of sourdough significantly reduces phytic acid. This means the medieval peasant was likely absorbing more nutrients from their coarse, dark bread than we do from our enriched white loaf. The health benefits go further. Sourdough fermentation also breaks down some of the gluten, making it easier to digest for many people. It has a lower glycemic index, meaning it doesn't spike your blood sugar the way modern white bread does. This was confirmed in a 2008 study in the journal Acta Diabetologica, which showed sourdough bread produced a significantly lower blood sugar and insulin response compared to bread made with baker's yeast. The process was communal and constant. A piece of the starter, the leaven, was saved from each bake to start the next one. It was a continuous chain, a living thing passed through generations. The bread of the Middle Ages wasn't just food. It was the result of a biological process that unlocked nutrients and made the grain more digestible. We're now rediscovering this. Artisan bakeries charge a premium for the very kind of bread that was once the standard for the poor. They didn't know about phytic acid or the glycemic index. They just knew this was how you made bread. But what if the specific strains of wild yeast and bacteria from 1,000 years ago had unique properties we've now lost forever? Are the sourdough starters we cultivate today a pale imitation of the robust microbial cultures that existed before industrialization? And could the disappearance of these ancient starters be linked to the rise of modern digestive ailments? Number 21. Did they eat junk food? The short answer is no, they couldn't. The concept of ultra-processed food didn't exist. There were no factories pumping out food like substances with 50 ingredients, most of which you can't pronounce. No high fructose corn syrup, no hydrogenated oils, no artificial flavors or preservatives. Their food was, by definition, whole food. An apple was an apple. A piece of pork was a piece of pork. Their version of processed food was cheese, butter, cured meat, or pickled vegetables. These are processes of preservation, often using fermentation, which actually add nutritional value. They don't strip it away. Think of the difference between sauerkraut and a can of spaghetti. Sauerkraut is cabbage and salt transformed by bacteria into a food teeming with probiotics. Canned spaghetti is refined flour, sugar, and a host of chemicals designed for shelf stability. The modern rise of what Carlos Montero, a professor of nutrition and public health at the University of Sao Paulo, calls ultra-processed foods has been directly linked to the obesity and chronic disease epidemic. His NOVA classification system defines these foods as industrial formulations made mostly from substances extracted from foods like fats, starches, and sugars, or synthesized in labs. A 2019 study in the journal Cell Metabolism provided direct experimental evidence. Researchers let people eat as much as they wanted from either an ultra-processed diet or an unprocessed diet. On the ultra-processed diet, people ate an average of 500 calories more per day and gained weight. On the unprocessed diet, they lost weight. Medieval people didn't have this problem. Their sweetest treat was fruit or a drizzle of honey. Their snacks, if they had them, were a piece of bread and cheese. They weren't fighting a constant battle against engineered foods designed to be hyper-palatable and addictive. Their food environment was, by its very nature, healthy. It was a world without Pringles, Twinkies, or Coke. The closest they got to a sweet treat was something like a gingerbread, heavily spiced, and made with honey, or a fruit tart. And these were for special occasions, not daily consumption. But if their bodies never had to cope with an onslaught of refined sugar and industrial chemicals, would they be more or less resilient to them than we are? If we transported a medieval peasant to a modern supermarket, would their system completely shut down? And what subtle, long-term effects are our ultra-processed foods having on our genes, effects that might not be fully understood for generations? Year number 20. How did they survive without refrigeration? We see refrigeration as essential. How could you live without a fridge? For medieval people, it was normal. And the methods they used to preserve food without it were surprisingly healthy. They didn't have chemical preservatives like sodium benzoate or BHT. They had salt, smoke, air, acid, and fermentation. Salting and smoking meat and fish were common. Think of prosciutto, bacon, or smoked salmon. These methods draw out water, making it impossible for harmful bacteria to grow. While a modern diet high in processed, salt-laden foods is a problem, the salt used in traditional curing was part of a diet that was otherwise low in sodium. And smoking, while it can create some harmful compounds, also imparted flavors that made simple food interesting. Pickling was another key strategy. Vegetables like cabbage, cucumbers, and onions were submerged in a brine of salt and water, or sometimes vinegar. This is lactofermentation. The salt kills off bad bacteria, allowing beneficial lactobacillus bacteria to thrive. These bacteria convert sugars into lactic acid, which preserves the vegetables and creates a tangy flavor. This is how they made sauerkraut and other pickled foods. The result is a food not just preserved, but enhanced. It's rich in probiotics, the good bacteria that support a healthy gut microbiome. We now buy expensive probiotic supplements to get the same benefits they got from their stored winter vegetables. Drying was also crucial. Fruits, herbs, mushrooms, and grains were dried in the sun or near the fire. This removed the moisture, concentrating the flavor and nutrients, and allowing for long-term storage. Think of dried apples or sun-dried tomatoes. Cheese and butter are also products of preservation. They are ways of storing the nutritional value of milk long after it would have spoiled. The fermentation process in cheese making also adds probiotics. They were turning a perishable liquid into a stable, nutrient-dense solid. Their entire food system was built on these natural preservation techniques. It was a world of living, fermented foods, not sterile, chemically preserved ones. But what if the constant low-level exposure to a vast array of bacteria in their fermented and cured foods gave their immune systems a kind of training that our hyper-sanitized food system lacks? Could our obsession with sterility be making us more vulnerable to autoimmune diseases? And are there beneficial microbial compounds in traditionally smoked or salted foods that modern science has completely overlooked? Number 19, was their meat better for us? Yes, almost certainly. The animal on a medieval plate lived a very different life from the animal in a modern factory farm. There were no concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs. Animals roamed freely. Pigs foraged in forests, eating acorns and roots. Chickens scratched in the dirt for bugs and worms. Cows and sheep ate grass in pastures. This means their meat had a completely different nutritional profile. Meat from grass-fed cows, for example, is much higher in omega-3 fatty acids, the healthy fats that reduce inflammation. A 2010 study from California State University, Chico, showed that grass-fed beef has a much better omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, closer to the ideal 2:1, whereas grain-fed beef can be as high as 21. A diet high in omega-6 and low in omega-3 is associated with chronic inflammation, a root cause of many modern diseases. And medieval meat was also free from the antibiotics and growth hormones that are standard in modern industrial agriculture. They weren't trying to fatten animals up as quickly and cheaply as possible. The animal grew at its natural pace, eating its natural diet. The result was meat that was leaner, more flavorful, and more nutritious. They also practiced nose-to-tail eating. They didn't just eat the muscle meat. They ate the organs, the fat, the skin, and they boiled the bones for broth. Organ meats like liver and heart are incredibly nutrient dense. Liver is one of the best sources of vitamin A, B12, iron, and copper on the planet. We now throw these parts away or feed them to pets, while our ancestors prized them as the most valuable parts of the animal. They couldn't afford to waste anything. This necessity forced them into a more complete and balanced form of carnivory. When they ate meat, it was of a much higher quality. But for most people, they didn't eat it every day. Meat was special, it was a feature of feasts or a Sunday meal. The daily diet was more plant-based. This combination of high-quality, occasional meat and a plant-rich diet is something many modern nutritionists now advocate. But could the meat from animals eating a truly wild and varied diet of hundreds of different plants, roots, and insects contain micronutrients that we don't even know exist? Are we missing vital compounds because our grass-fed cows today only eat a monoculture of rye or fescue? What complex nutritional information was lost when we moved animals from the forest to the feedlot? Number 18, what did they eat instead of sugar? Sugar, as we know it, that white refined crystal, was virtually non-existent for the average person in the Middle Ages. It was an incredibly expensive import from the East, treated like a spice and used sparingly by the very wealthy. The cookbook of King Richard II, the form of curry from around 1390, includes recipes with sugar, but this was the food of the 1%. For everyone else, sweetness came from natural sources. The primary sweetener was honey. Honey is not just empty calories like refined sugar. It contains traces of vitamins and minerals, and it has natural antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. It was used as both a food and a medicine. Unlike sugar, which requires intense processing, honey was a whole food. The other main source of sweetness was fruit. Fresh fruit in the summer, and dried fruit like raisins, figs, and dates in the winter. Fruits contain fructose, but it comes packaged with fiber, water, vitamins, and phytonutrients. The fiber slows down the absorption of the sugar, preventing the dramatic blood sugar spikes that refined sugar causes. This absence of refined sugar from their diet is perhaps one of the biggest health advantages they had. Today, we are drowning in it. It's in our bread, our sauces, our yogurts, our drinks. The work of doctors like Robert Lustig has shown how excessive consumption of refined sugar, particularly fructose from high fructose corn syrup, drives metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and heart disease. John Yudkin, a British nutritionist, warned of these dangers back in his 1972 book, Pure White and Deadly, but his voice was drowned out by the fat is bad consensus of the time. Medieval people were not consuming the massive, constant doses of sugar that we are. They didn't have sugary cereals for breakfast, soda for lunch, and a dessert after every dinner. Their palates were accustomed to more savory, sour, and bitter tastes. Sweetness was a rare treat, not a constant expectation. This protected them from a whole host of modern diseases that are now reaching epidemic levels. But what if their gut microbiomes were so different from ours due to the lack of sugar that they were better able to extract energy from fiber and complex carbohydrates? Is it possible that the modern sugar-fed gut has lost entire species of beneficial bacteria? Could the introduction of sugar have been the single most destructive event in the history of human health? Number 17, did their doctors tell them what to eat? Yes, absolutely. Food was medicine, and medicine was food. They didn't separate the two. The dominant medical theory of the time, inherited from the ancient Greeks like Hippocrates and Galen, was humoral theory. This theory held that the body was composed of 4 humors: blood hot and moist, phlegm cold and moist, yellow bile hot and dry, and black bile cold and dry. Sickness was caused by an imbalance of these humors. The goal of a physician was to restore balance. And the primary way to do this was through diet. Every food, drink, herb, and spice was also classified according to these properties. A person with a fever, considered a condition of excess heat, would be prescribed cold foods like cucumber, lettuce, or fish. A person with a cold or cough, an excess of cold and moist phlegm, would be given hot and dry foods like pepper, garlic, or roasted meat. It sounds like nonsense to us now, but look closer. What are hot foods in this system? Pepper, ginger, garlic, mustard. These are things we now recognize as having anti-inflammatory and circulation-boosting properties. What are cold foods? Cucumbers, melons, leafy greens. These are hydrating and cooling. The system wasn't scientific in our sense, but it was an intuitive framework for achieving balance. It encouraged variety and paying attention to how different foods made you feel. One of the most famous medical texts of the Middle Ages was the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum from the medical school of Salerno, Italy. It was a long poem full of health advice, much of it dietary. It advised moderation, cheerful meal times, and specific foods for specific ailments. Another key figure was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess who wrote extensively on health and nutrition. She championed foods like spelt, fennel, and chickpeas and described their specific healing properties in a way that combined spiritual and physical health. They were practicing a form of personalized nutrition. The diet was tailored to the individual's constitution, their dominant humor, the season, and their specific illness. While the underlying theory was wrong, the practical application eating a varied diet of whole foods and using herbs and spices for their medicinal effects was incredibly sound. But is it possible that the humoral categories of hot, cold, moist, and dry were actually a primitive but effective way of classifying foods by their inflammatory or anti-inflammatory properties? Did they stumble upon a functional system of nutritional medicine without understanding the biochemical mechanisms? And what if certain individuals do have constitutions that respond better to warming or cooling foods, a concept modern nutrition completely ignores? Number 16. Why did they eat so many herbs and spices? Walk into a medieval kitchen, at least a wealthy one, and you would be hit by a powerful aroma of spices. They used cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, pepper, saffron, and cardamom in huge quantities. We often assume this was just to cover the taste of spoiled meat. That's a myth. Spices were incredibly expensive. You wouldn't waste them on bad food. The real reasons were health and status. Spices were a core part of the humoral medical system. Ginger and pepper were hot and dry, used to counteract cold, foods like fish. Or cinnamon was hot and moist. Spices were used to balance a dish and make it healthier according to their understanding. They were a prescription as much as a seasoning, and now modern science is showing that these spices are packed with powerful medicinal compounds. Turmeric, a relative of ginger widely used in medieval Europe, contains curcumin, a potent anti-inflammatory. A 2017 review in the Journal of Medicinal Food detailed curcumin's potential in managing inflammatory conditions, metabolic syndrome, and even anxiety. Cinnamon has been shown to help regulate blood sugar. Cloves are incredibly high in antioxidants. Garlic and onions, the workhorses of the medieval kitchen, contain sulfur compounds that support detoxification and cardiovascular health. They also used a vast array of fresh herbs from the garden. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme weren't just for a sprinkle of flavor. They were used by the handful. These herbs are also full of vitamins and volatile oils with antibacterial and medicinal properties. Rosemary contains compounds that can improve memory. Thyme has antiseptic qualities. And sage was used for everything from digestive troubles to infections. The famous medieval abbess Hildegard of Bingen wrote extensively about the healing properties of herbs, prescribing them for specific ailments. Their food was a delivery system for a constant low dose of these powerful plant compounds. Our modern diet, by contrast, is often bland and unspiced. We've replaced the functional medicinal flavors of herbs and spices with the simple addictive tastes of salt, sugar, and fat. The medieval diet, even for the poor who relied on garden herbs and garlic, was infused with plant medicine. But what if the synergistic effect of combining multiple spices in a single dish, as was common in medieval cooking, creates unique health benefits that are greater than the sum of their parts? Are we missing out on powerful effects by studying these spices in isolation? Could ancient spice blends like an old powdered deuce hold the key to treating complex modern illnesses? Number 15, did they only drink beer and wine? Pretty much, yes, and it was a healthy choice. Not because of the alcohol, but because of what they were avoiding: contaminated water. In a world without modern sanitation, water from rivers and wells was often teeming with dangerous pathogens like cholera and typhoid. It was a game of Russian roulette every time you took a drink. Beer and wine, on the other hand, were safe. The process of fermentation and the alcohol itself killed off most of the harmful bacteria. Beer was not the high alcohol beverage we think of today. It was often called small beer, with a very low alcohol content, probably around 1 to 2%. It was a source of hydration and calories consumed by everyone, including children. It was a staple of the diet, a liquid bread, and this beer was a living food. It was unfiltered, unpasteurized, and full of B vitamins and beneficial yeast. It was a source of probiotics. The same goes for wine and cider. They were naturally fermented beverages full of the complex compounds from the original fruit or grain. This is a world away from modern, sterile, filtered, commercial beer or sugary soft drinks. The Benedictine monk was a master brewer. Monasteries were centers of brewing excellence, and the monks understood its importance for health and hospitality. The Rule of St. Benedict, written around 530 AD, even specified a daily allowance of wine for the monks. This isn't to say they were all drunk all the time. The alcohol content was low, and it was consumed with meals. It was a functional beverage providing safe hydration, calories, and micronutrients. By choosing beer and wine over potentially lethal water, they were making the smartest choice available to them. We now drink chlorinated, fluoridated tap water or sterile bottled water, devoid of any of the microbial life that their beverages contained. But what if the daily consumption of low alcohol, microbially rich fermented beverages built a different kind of gut-brain axis in medieval people? Could this have affected not just their physical health, but their mental and emotional states in ways we can't comprehend? And have we lost a key source of B vitamins and other nutrients by sterilizing all our drinks? Number 14, what about vegetables? We have this image of medieval people just gnawing on meat bones. The reality, especially for the 90% of the population who were peasants, was a diet centered on vegetables. The centerpiece of the medieval peasant's meal was pottage. This was a thick stew or soup, constantly simmering over the fire. Into the pot went whatever was available from the garden or foraged from the fields. The base was usually grains like oats or barley. Then came vegetables, onions, leeks, garlic, cabbage, turnips, parsnips, and carrots, which were often purple or yellow, not orange. They also added peas and beans, known as peas. This provided a complete protein, the combination of legumes and grains. It was a hearty, nutritious, one-pot meal. Foraging added even more variety and nutrients. They ate wild greens like nettles, dandelions, and fat hen. We call these weeds today and spray them with poison. They saw them as free, nutritious food. Nettles are incredibly high in iron, calcium, and vitamin A. Dandelion greens are a fantastic source of vitamin K and a great detoxifier for the liver. This vegetable-heavy diet was incredibly high in fiber. Modern diets are notoriously fiber deficient. Fiber is crucial for feeding the good bacteria in our gut, ensuring regular digestion, and helping to manage blood sugar and cholesterol. The medieval peasant's gut was likely teeming with a much more diverse and robust microbiome than ours, thanks to this constant influx of different plant fibers. A 2018 study in the journal Science showed that the modern Western diet is causing a progressive loss of microbial diversity in the human gut. The medieval diet was the opposite of that. Even the wealthy, who ate more meat, still consumed a lot of vegetables. Salads or salads were popular, with a wide variety of greens and herbs dressed in oil and vinegar. Vegetables were also served as side dishes, cooked in broths or roasted. Their diet was far from the meat and potatoes caricature we imagine. It was deeply rooted in the soil and the garden, but if their gut bacteria were adapted to process a massive amount of fiber from a wide variety of plants, did they harbor specific microbial species that are now extinct in modern humans? Could the loss of these fiber specialist bacteria be a root cause of modern gut disorders like IBS and Crohn's disease? And what nutritional secrets are still hiding in the weeds they ate that we continue to ignore? Number 13, did they eat with the seasons? They had no choice. There were no long-haul trucks, no refrigerated shipping containers, no heated greenhouses. You ate what was available when it was available. This meant their diet changed dramatically throughout the year in a rhythm that modern life has erased. Spring was the hungry gap. Winter stores were running low, and the new crops hadn't come in yet. It was a time of leanness, of eating preserved foods, and the first wild greens like nettles and sorrel. Summer was a time of abundance, fresh fruits like berries and cherries, and a huge variety of fresh vegetables from the garden. This was a time for fresh cooling foods according to their medical theories. Well, autumn was the harvest season. Grains were brought in, apples and pears were picked, and animals were slaughtered. It was a time of feasting and preserving. Meat was salted and smoked, fruits were dried, and vegetables were pickled for the coming winter. Winter was a time for these preserved foods. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips that could be stored in a cellar, dried beans and peas, salted meat and fish, and fermented foods like sauerkraut. This forced seasonal eating had profound health benefits. It ensured a huge variety of foods over the course of the year. You weren't eating the same 10 or 15 foods day in and day out, like many of us do now. This variety of plant foods fed a diverse range of gut bacteria. Each fruit and vegetable has its own unique profile of vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. By eating seasonally, they were constantly rotating these nutrients. Dr. Tim Spector, a professor of genetic epidemiology at King's College London and author of The Diet Myth, emphasizes the importance of eating a wide variety of plants for gut health. He suggests aiming for 30 different plants a week. A medieval peasant likely achieved this without even trying, just by eating what was available from their garden and the surrounding countryside. Our modern supermarket, with its year-round strawberries and asparagus, gives us the illusion of choice, but it often leads to a monotonous diet. Eating seasonally also meant that food was at its peak nutritional value. A tomato picked from the vine in August is a different food from one picked green in Mexico in January, and gassed to turn red on its way to your store. The nutrient content is higher, the flavor is better, and the environmental cost is lower. But is there a deeper biological rhythm to seasonal eating that we have lost? Did our ancestors' genes have seasonal expression patterns that were triggered by the changing diet, preparing the body for winter or summer? By eating the same foods year-round, have we flattened our own biology and made ourselves more susceptible to chronic disease? Number 12. Why did they cook with lard and butter? In the modern world, for decades, we were told to fear animal fats. Butter and lard were villains responsible for clogging our arteries. We were told to switch to vegetable oils and margarine. This was a huge mistake. Medieval people cooked primarily with animal fats, and they were healthier for it. The fats they used were lard from pigs and butter from cows. These are stable, natural fats. They are less prone to oxidation when heated compared to many modern vegetable oils. The so-called vegetable oils we use today, like canola, soybean, and corn oil, are industrial products. They are extracted from seeds using high heat and chemical solvents, a process that creates a fragile, unstable oil. When these polyunsaturated oils are heated, they can oxidize and create harmful compounds like aldehydes, which are linked to inflammation and chronic disease. The campaign against animal fats was largely based on the work of Ansel Keys and his 7 countries study in the mid-20th century, which linked saturated fat to heart disease. However, this study has been heavily criticized for cherry-picking data. More recent analysis, including a massive 2010 meta-analysis in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, found no significant evidence that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of heart disease. The fats used in the Middle Ages were part of a whole food package. The pig that produced the lard had likely been foraging, leading to a fat richer in nutrients like vitamin D. The cow that produced the butter was eating grass, resulting in butter that was higher in fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, and K2, as well as conjugated linoleic acid CLA, a fatty acid with anti-cancer properties. They didn't have trans fats, which are created by hydrogenating vegetable oils to make them solid, like in margarine and shortening. Trans fats are now widely recognized as being incredibly harmful, linked to heart disease, inflammation, and insulin resistance. The medieval diet was entirely free of these man-made, toxic fats. They ate real fats from real animals living real lives. But what if the specific combination of fatty acids in a pastured pig, raised on acorns and roots, has a unique biological effect that we can't replicate with modern feeding practices? Are there subtle differences in the molecular structure of fats from traditionally raised animals that make them fundamentally healthier? And could the rise of industrial seed oils be the single largest unaccounted for variable in the modern disease epidemic? Number 11, could giving up food make you stronger? For medieval people, fasting wasn't a diet trend. It was a deep-rooted part of life woven into the religious calendar. It was a spiritual discipline, and it was incredibly good for them. The most significant fast was Lent, the 40 days before Easter. During this time, the rules were strict: no meat, and for most of the period, no animal products at all, including eggs and dairy. That means for over a month each year, a huge portion of the population was on a mandatory whole food, plant-based diet. But it didn't stop there. There was also a fast during Advent before Christmas, and fasts on Wednesdays, Fridays, and sometimes Saturdays of every week. In total, a devout person in the Middle Ages could be fasting for up to a third of the year. Fasting didn't always mean no food at all, but rather abstaining from certain foods, primarily meat. The fish days were a huge part of this. They had to get their protein from fish and plants. This practice has stunning parallels to what we now call intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. By regularly abstaining from food or certain types of food, they were giving their bodies a rest. This is a process that modern science is just beginning to understand. In 2016, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to Yoshinori Ohsumi for his discoveries of the mechanisms for autophagy. Autophagy is the body's cellular cleanup process. When we fast, our cells start to recycle old, damaged components. It's like taking out the trash at a cellular level. This process is crucial for preventing diseases like cancer, neurodegeneration, and for slowing down aging. The regular fasting of the medieval calendar would have powerfully stimulated this process. Periodic fasting also improves insulin sensitivity, reduces inflammation, and can trigger the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, which is like fertilizer for your brain cells. They weren't doing it for these reasons, they were doing it for the salvation of their souls. But the physical benefits were a powerful side effect. Our modern culture of 3 meals a day plus snacks, never allowing our bodies to enter a fasted state, is historically abnormal. But if their bodies were so metabolically adapted to frequent periods of fasting and food restriction, is our constant state of being fed actively promoting the very diseases of aging we are trying to fight? Could extended, medically supervised fasts, mirroring something like Lent, be a more powerful intervention for chronic disease than any drug? And what other undiscovered cellular repair mechanisms are triggered by fasting that we don't even know about yet? Number 10, were their meals more mindful? In our world, eating is often a rushed, solitary, and distracted affair. We eat in our cars, at our desks, in front of the TV. The food is just fuel, shoveled in as quickly as possible. For medieval people, meal times were structured, communal, and often ritualized. In a monastery, meals were taken in silence in the refectory, while one of the monks read from a sacred text. The focus was on contemplation and gratitude. In a noble household, the meal was a highly structured ceremony with specific rules of etiquette and service. Even in a peasant hut, the family would gather together at the end of the day to share the pottage from a single pot. Eating was a social event. This slower, more focused approach to eating has real physiological benefits. It's what we now call mindful eating. When you eat slowly and without distraction, you are more in tune with your body's hunger and satiety signals. You are more likely to notice when you are full and stop eating. Rushed eating, on the other hand, often leads to overeating because it takes about 20 minutes for your gut to send the "I'm full" signal to your brain. Chewing your food thoroughly, which is a natural part of eating slowly, also improves digestion. The process of digestion starts in the mouth, with enzymes in your saliva beginning to break down carbohydrates. Better chewing means less work for your stomach and intestines. The social aspect is also important. A 2017 study published in the Journals of Gerontology found that older adults who ate alone were more likely to have poor nutritional habits. Sharing a meal is a fundamental human bonding experience. The medieval meal, whether in a castle or a cottage, reinforced social ties and a sense of community. The Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum advised, "Let your mind be cheerful at your meals." They knew that your state of mind affected your digestion. We now know that stress, the opposite of a cheerful meal, can severely impair digestive function by shunting blood away from the gut. They didn't have the science to explain it, but their cultural practices around eating promoted better digestion, portion control, and mental well-being. They treated mealtime with a respect that we have largely lost. But does the act of eating in silence while listening to a text actually change the way the brain processes food and satiety? Could the specific rituals and etiquette of a medieval banquet have a measurable effect on nutrient absorption? And what has been the true psychological cost of losing the communal meal as the central pillar of family and community life? Number 9. What did they do about snacking? They didn't do it. The idea of constantly snacking throughout the day is a modern invention, fueled by the modern food industry. For most of the Middle Ages, the standard pattern was 2 meals a day. The main meal was dinner, which was eaten in the middle of the day, around 10 a.m. to noon. This was the largest meal. Then there was a lighter meal, supper, in the late afternoon or early evening. Or breakfast, as we know it, was not a regular meal for most adults. The word itself means to break the fast of the night, and it was often just a piece of bread and some ale, if anything. The 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas viewed eating too early in the day as a form of the sin of gluttony. This 2-meal-a-day pattern created a natural daily fasting window of 16 to 18 hours, from supper one day to dinner the next. This is exactly the pattern that many people today are trying to achieve with intermittent fasting protocols like 16-8. As we discussed, this has huge benefits for cellular repair, insulin sensitivity, and overall metabolic health. The medieval person was living a 16-8 lifestyle without even trying. The lack of snacking also gave their digestive systems a much-needed rest. Our modern habit of grazing means our digestive system is constantly working. This may contribute to digestive issues and can prevent our bodies from ever fully switching from burning sugar to burning fat for fuel. Why don't we eat this way now? The Industrial Revolution changed working patterns, pushing the main meal to the evening. And then the food industry realized it could make a lot of money by creating a new eating occasion, the snack. They invented granola bars, chips, crackers, and a million other packaged products to be eaten between meals. They sold us the idea that we need to eat constantly to keep our energy up. The medieval experience suggests this is nonsense. They performed hard physical labor on 2 meals a day. By sticking to distinct meal times and avoiding snacks, they maintained a healthy metabolic rhythm that our constant eating culture has completely disrupted. But what if the human pancreas and endocrine system are fundamentally designed for only 2 insulin spikes per day, and our modern 3-meal plus snacks pattern is slowly burning them out? Could the entire concept of breakfast is the most important meal of the day be a marketing slogan that has caused untold metabolic damage? And what is the optimal meal frequency for human health that we have forgotten? Number 8. Why was fish so important? On all those fasting days, Fridays, Saturdays, Lent, Advent, meat was forbidden. The solution was fish. For those living near the coast or rivers, fresh fish was an option. But for most, it was preserved fish, salted, smoked, or dried. Herring and cod were the staples. This religious rule had a massive unintended health benefit. It forced the entire population to eat fish at least once or twice a week, and often more. Fish, especially oily fish like herring, salmon, and mackerel, are the best dietary source of the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. These fats are crucial for health. They are powerfully anti-inflammatory. They are vital for brain health and cognitive function. The brain is literally built from these fats. They are essential for a healthy cardiovascular system. A huge body of modern research has confirmed this. A 2006 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that eating fish 1 to 2 times per week could cut the risk of dying from a heart attack by more than a third. The medieval diet, by religious decree, was rich in these essential fats. The modern Western diet, by contrast, is a disaster in this regard. It is flooded with pro-inflammatory, omega-6 fats from vegetable oils, and grain-fed meat, and woefully deficient in anti-inflammatory omega-3s. This imbalance is thought to be a major driver of many chronic inflammatory diseases, from heart disease to arthritis to depression. They didn't know about omega-3s. They were just following the rules of the church. They avoided meat for penance and ate fish as a substitute. In doing so, they were consuming a near-perfect antidote to inflammation and a powerful brain booster. The prioress in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is described as being so well bred, she never got grease on her cup, a subtle nod to the refined table manners of the upper class who ate less fatty meats. But the peasant eating his salted herring was getting a far superior nutritional deal. But could the very high consumption of preserved salted fish have had other effects, both good and bad, on their health that we haven't considered? What was the omega-3 content of fish from 1,000 years ago before industrial pollution of the oceans? And if an entire population's brain health was being supported by this regular fish consumption, what has been the cognitive cost of replacing fish with chicken as our primary non-red meat protein? Number 7, did they drink bone broth? Yes, constantly. It was a cornerstone of their cooking. In a world where no part of an animal was wasted, the bones were a valuable resource. After the meat was carved off, the bones, knuckles, feet, and carcass were put in a pot with water and simmered for hours, even days. This was the base for soups, stews, and sauces. It was the original pottage. This long, slow simmering process extracts a wealth of nutrients from the bones and connective tissue. The resulting broth is rich in collagen, gelatin, and amino acids like glycine and proline. These are the building blocks for our own connective tissues, our skin, hair, nails, joints, and gut lining. We now pay a fortune for collagen supplements to improve our skin and joint health. Medieval people were getting it for free from their kitchen scraps. Gelatin and glycine are also fantastic for gut health. They can help to soothe and repair the lining of the digestive tract, which is why bone broth is a central part of gut healing. Protocols like the GAPS diet, developed by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. Well, bone broth is also a good source of minerals like calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus in a form that is easy for the body to absorb. The slow cooking pulls these minerals out of the bones. This practice wasn't a health trend, it was just frugal, common sense cooking. They were extracting every last bit of nutrition and flavor from the animal. This broth, full of protein and minerals, could turn a few meager vegetables into a nourishing meal. It was a way of stretching food and maximizing nutrition. Today, we typically throw the bones away, and then we wonder why our joints ache and our digestion is poor. The famous 12th century physician Maimonides was known to prescribe chicken soup as a remedy for colds and asthma. The broth he was referring to would have been a true bone broth, simmered from the whole bird. He was recognizing its medicinal restorative properties centuries ago. But does bone broth made from the bones of a truly pasture-raised animal contain unique growth factors or signaling molecules that are absent from the broth of a factory-farmed animal? What is the full spectrum of peptides and proteins released during a multi-day simmer, and what are their functions in the body? And could the loss of gelatin-rich broths from our diet be a contributing factor to the epidemic of joint and gut problems we see today? Number 6, were all dairy products created equal? The milk a medieval person drank or used to make cheese was a completely different product from the milk we buy in the supermarket today. It was raw, unpasteurized, and full fat, and it came from cows that ate grass. Pasteurization, the process of heating milk to kill bacteria, was not invented until the 19th century by Louis Pasteur. While it made milk safer in an age of growing cities and poor sanitation, it also changes the nature of the milk. It destroys beneficial enzymes like lactase, which can help with the digestion of lactose, and it kills off the rich ecosystem of probiotic bacteria present in raw milk. The milk they consumed was a living food, and the products made from it, like cheese, butter, and kefir, were also teeming with beneficial microbes. The traditional cheesemaking process is a form of fermentation. It concentrates the nutrients of the milk and adds a huge dose of probiotics. Each village and region would have had its own unique strains of bacteria in its cheese, contributing to a diverse gut microbiome for the people who ate it. The cows themselves were also different. They were often older, hardier breeds, not the modern high-production Holsteins. And crucially, they ate grass. As we saw with meat, this changes the nutritional profile of the milk. Milk from grass-fed cows is higher in omega-3 fats, vitamin K2, vitamin E, and CLA. Vitamin K2 is particularly important. It works in synergy with vitamin D and calcium to ensure that calcium goes into your bones and teeth, not your arteries. The work of dentist Weston A. Price in the 1930s highlighted the importance of these fat-soluble vitamins from grass-fed animals for dental health and proper facial development. They consumed full-fat dairy. The modern trend for low-fat or skim milk is nutritionally backward. The fat is where the valuable fat-soluble vitamins are. Removing the fat removes the very things that make dairy so nutritious. The 2016 study in the journal Circulation found that people with higher levels of full-fat dairy consumption had a lower risk of developing diabetes. But what unique bacterial strains have been lost forever due to pasteurization and the industrialization of dairy? Could the proteins in milk from older heritage breeds of cows be less allergenic than those from modern Holsteins? And is the rise in lactose intolerance partly a result of us drinking sterile milk that lacks the very enzymes and bacteria needed to digest it properly? Number 5, how did they manage without a global supply chain? They ate locally. It was their only option. The vast majority of the food a person ate was grown or raised within a few miles of their home. This had enormous health and environmental benefits. The food was fresh, it was picked from the garden or the field, and on the table within hours or days. There was no long transit time, no sitting in warehouses for weeks. As soon as a fruit or vegetable is picked, its nutrient content starts to decline. The vitamin C content of broccoli can drop by 50% within a day of harvesting. The food they ate was at its absolute nutritional peak. Eating locally also meant a stronger connection to the food and the land. They knew the person who grew their grain or raised their pigs. There was an accountability that is absent in our anonymous global food system. The soil in their immediate area also had a unique mineral profile, and their bodies were adapted to it. There's a concept known as terroir in winemaking, the idea that the soil and climate of a place give the wine its unique character. This applies to all food. The food of a medieval village had a unique nutritional terroir. This reliance on local food also protected them from the vulnerabilities of a long supply chain. Like they were self-sufficient, like a war or a crisis in another part of the world wouldn't leave their shelves empty. Our modern system, where a head of lettuce might travel 1,500 miles to reach us, is incredibly fragile and energy intensive. The 100-mile diet is a modern movement trying to recapture this. In 2007, the authors Elisa Smith and J.B. McKinnon wrote a book about their experience of eating only foods grown within 100 miles of their home for a year. They found it challenging, but ultimately rewarding, reconnecting them with their local food system and the seasons. For medieval people, this wasn't a challenge, it was just life. They were living the ultimate farm-to-table existence. It wasn't a trendy restaurant concept, it was a daily reality born of necessity. But what if the human body is designed to adapt to the specific micronutrient and microbial profile of its local environment? By eating food from all over the world, are we confusing our bodies and our immune systems? Could there be subtle information in local food that primes our bodies for the local climate and seasons in ways we don't understand? Number 4, did they eat more variety than us? It seems counterintuitive. We have supermarkets with 40,000 different products. Surely we have more variety, but if you look closely, that variety is an illusion. It's thousands of products made from the same few core ingredients: corn, soy, and wheat. The medieval diet, especially for a peasant, was based on a much wider variety of plant species. They ate different types of grains like spelt, emmer, rye, and barley, not just wheat. They ate dozens of varieties of apples and pears, not the 5 or 6 standard types we see today. Each had a different flavor, texture, and nutritional profile. Their gardens were full of heirloom vegetables that have now been lost, replaced by commercial varieties bred for yield and transportability, not flavor or nutrition. And then there was foraging. They gathered a wide array of wild plants, berries, nuts, and mushrooms. Each of these wild foods brought a unique set of nutrients and phytonutrients into their diet. This diversity was their strength. Each plant species feeds a different set of microbes in the gut. A diet with high plant diversity leads to a high microbial diversity, which is the #1 indicator of a healthy gut, according to researchers like Tim Spector. The book Eating on the Wild Side by Joe Robinson details how many of our modern fruits and vegetables are nutritionally inferior to their wild ancestors. We have systematically bred out the bitterness from many plants. That bitter taste often comes from phytonutrients, powerful compounds that protect the plant from pests and protect us from disease. Medieval food was likely more bitter, more pungent, and more nutritionally dense. They also ate a wider variety of animal foods. They ate game like venison, boar, and rabbit. They ate many types of birds, not just chicken, and they ate a wider variety of fish from the rivers and seas. Our modern diet, in comparison, is incredibly narrow. Despite the illusion of choice, we are nutritionally impoverished. But have we lost genetic information in our crops that is now irrecoverable, information that coded for the production of vital phytonutrients? What percentage of the edible plant species that a medieval peasant regularly consumed are now extinct or unknown to us? And could reintroducing this lost diversity be the key to solving our chronic disease crisis? Number 3, was their lifestyle the original paleo diet? Not exactly, but their daily life involved a level of physical activity that is hard for us to imagine. There were no cars, no office jobs, no elevators. Life was a workout. For the vast majority of the population who worked in agriculture, the day was spent plowing, sowing, scything, and harvesting. This was hard physical labor. It was a mix of strength training, endurance, and functional movement. They weren't going to the gym for an hour. Their entire life was the gym. This constant, low to moderate intensity activity is exactly what the human body is designed for. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors walked miles every day. The medieval farmer replicated this pattern. This level of activity builds strong bones and muscles, maintains metabolic health, and keeps the cardiovascular system in shape. Even for a town dweller or a noble, life was more active. You walked everywhere. You rode horses. There was no sedentary office culture. The modern epidemic of diseases linked to a sedentary lifestyle, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, even some cancers, was simply not an issue. a 2012 study in The Lancet called Physical Inactivity, a Pandemic, responsible for as many deaths as smoking. Their activity was integrated into their day. It had a purpose. It wasn't something they had to schedule in. This daily movement, combined with their whole food diet and lack of processed sugar, created a population that was likely much leaner and more metabolically healthy than we are today, despite facing other challenges like infectious disease and periodic famine. They didn't have exercise, they had life. The distinction is crucial. We try to compensate for 8 hours of sitting with 1 hour of intense exercise, but growing evidence suggests that's not enough. The key seems to be regular, consistent movement throughout the day, something their lifestyle enforced naturally. But what was the true daily calorie expenditure of a medieval peasant, and how would it compare to a modern athlete? Could their constant physical labor have triggered epigenetic changes that made them more resilient to hardship? And is it possible that the human body simply cannot be healthy without the stress of daily hard physical work? Number two, why was nose to tail eating so normal? When a medieval family or community slaughtered an animal, they used every single part of it. The muscle meat was eaten, the fat was rendered into lard, the bones were boiled for broth, the skin was used for leather or cooked into cracklings, and the organs were prized. This was nose to tail eating. It wasn't a trendy philosophy, it was a non-negotiable reality. Waste was not an option. This practice ensured they received a much broader spectrum of nutrients than we do from our standard diet of muscle meat. Organ meats are superfoods. Liver is the most nutrient-dense food on the planet, packed with vitamin A, iron, B12, and copper. Its heart is rich in CoQ10, an essential nutrient for cellular energy and heart health. The kidneys are high in selenium, and B vitamins. These are the very nutrients that are often lacking in modern diets. We have prioritized a few select cuts, the steak, the chicken breast, and discarded the most nutritious parts of the animal. Figures like the Canadian dentist Weston A. Price observed in the 1930s that traditional cultures around the world went to great lengths to consume organ meats, often giving them to growing children and pregnant women, recognizing their unique value. They also ate the connective tissues, the skin and the cartilage, by slow cooking tougher cuts and making broths. This provided them with ample collagen and gelatin, crucial for joint, skin, and gut health. Our modern diet of lean, boneless, skinless meat is completely devoid of these essential proteins. This wasn't just about nutrition, it was about respect for the animal. Using every part was a way of honoring the life that had been taken to provide food. It was a more holistic and sustainable approach to eating meat. We have lost this connection, treating meat as a sterile product in a plastic package, disconnected from the animal it came from. The modern nose-to-tail movement, championed by chefs like Fergus Henderson of St. John Restaurant in London, is trying to bring back this lost wisdom. But for our ancestors, it wasn't a choice. It was the only way. But what unique peptides and nutrients exist in parts of the animal we no longer even consider food, like the spleen or the lungs? Did the consumption of an animal's glands and organs have a direct hormonal or immunological effect on the person eating them? And by narrowing our consumption to only muscle meat, what complex nutritional synergies have we lost? Number one, was their biggest advantage what they didn't have? Perhaps the most profound health rule of the Middle Ages was unintentional. It was defined by absence. Their health was protected not just by what they ate, but by what they didn't eat, what they couldn't do, and what they didn't know. They didn't have refined sugar. They didn't have refined vegetable oils. They didn't have ultra-processed foods. They didn't have chemical additives and preservatives. The absence of these four things alone would likely eliminate the majority of the chronic diseases that plague the modern world. They were protected from the industrial food system by the simple fact that it hadn't been invented yet. They didn't have a sedentary lifestyle. The structure of their society, their work, and their daily lives enforced constant natural movement. They were protected from the diseases of inactivity because inactivity wasn't an option. They didn't have chronic low-grade stress in the way we do. They had acute stresses, to be sure, famine, war, disease, but they didn't have the 24/7 news cycle, the endless emails, the social media pressure, the traffic jams. Their lives were governed by the natural rhythms of day and night and the seasons. They had periods of intense work followed by periods of rest. They had community and faith, which are powerful buffers against stress. They didn't have the illusion of control over nature. They were deeply aware of their dependence on the seasons, the weather, and the soil. This fostered a sense of humility and connection that we have lost. We believe we have conquered nature, and our food system reflects this arrogance. Their world was smaller, slower, and more connected to the earth. Their food rules were not written in diet books, they were written into the fabric of their reality. They ate seasonally, because there was no other way. They ate locally, because there was no other way. They fermented and preserved, because there was no other way. They ate whole foods, because there was no other way. Their constraints were their greatest blessing. We, with our abundance and our technology, have created a food environment that is actively hostile to our biology. We have engineered the nutrition out of our food and engineered an addiction. The medieval diet wasn't perfect. They faced deficiencies and starvation, but the underlying principles of their food system, whole, local, seasonal, and unprocessed, are the very principles we must return to if we want to reclaim our health. But what if the greatest missing piece is not a nutrient, but a mindset? What if the simple act of living without the constant, overwhelming choice of the modern world was the ultimate health benefit? And could it be that the single most toxic ingredient in the modern diet is not sugar or seed oils, but the relentless anxiety and stress of modern life itself?